In today's presentation, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 reasons why we need emotional mastery to conquer parental alienation. The 5 things we're going to talk about are: first, we're going to learn how easily childhood trauma is created. Number 2, the 2 needs of every child, attachment and authenticity, and how they correlate to alienation. Number 3, how emotions work and are created and then relived, and the role they play in parental alienation. Number 4, the 4 pillars of emotional mastery and their importance in reconnecting with our alienated child. And finally, I will offer solutions for those of you who are seeking answers beyond this presentation. So let's get started with how trauma gets created and some basic understandings of all of these topics. And the first thing we have to recognize is most people think that all of our thoughts and actions start with a thought. And that's the first thing we have to get into reality about. Is modern neuroscience shows that's not true. We actually feel before we ever think or take an action. Every thought and every action starts with an emotion. That's why we need emotional mastery. If we want to conquer all of this stuff, we have to learn how our thoughts are being initiated by emotions themselves. The next thing is to recognize that for every adult and every child, your whole life is a painting of your emotional condition. All of your struggles, all of your victories, every aspect of your adult life, the career you choose, the relationship you have, how you parent, every aspect of it is a window into the emotional pain that we've all experienced and we haven't healed. And so whatever is going on in our life, and specifically because of this topic, parental alienation, the difficulties that both ourselves as parents and our child are experiencing are all due to emotional dysregulation, emotional trauma that we've all suffered and haven't worked through yet. The next thing to recognize is that our children become the emotional condition of us as a parent. And children learn by mirroring, and they learn by, I'm going to get into a little bit more deeply as to how this happens. But basically, in the first 7 years of life, every one of us is in what's called a theta brainwave state. That's the exact same state as hypnosis. And so we basically have no boundaries. We don't really have cognition. Cognition kind of comes online between the age of 5 and 7. But everything that our parents are experiencing emotionally goes right into us. And so if you've had a bad day or a fight with your spouse, that tension, even if it's not in front of your child, but that tension you feel transfers right into your child. They're defenseless. So now you can see why the need for emotional mastery is so important. And so most people, in my experience, at least over 80% of people are like, wait a minute, I didn't know, my childhood was great. I mean, there are little things here and there, but yeah, I didn't go through any trauma in childhood. Well, that's because most of it, we weren't even cognitively or consciously aware of the perfect imperfections of every human being and every parent, and the emotional struggles that we all go through that were dumped into us before we were ever consciously aware of them. Most of them happened when we were in those first 7 years of development, where we're basically in a hypnotic state and not really conscious to anything that's going around us. So ultimately, your child's alienation is also a product of the unhealed pain they've experienced and their own lack of emotional mastery. So I know this is very difficult to hear and understand, and in many ways it feels like I'm blaming parents. That's not what I'm doing here. What I'm doing is bringing in truth to the limitations that we have as humans. For those that are spiritually inclined, we all, the premise of God and everything is that we are human, we are fallible, we are imperfect. But it is fascinating how we all put up walls around certain areas and don't allow ourselves to be imperfect in certain aspects. And we minimize the impact of our limitations as a human because we'll somehow blame ourselves. We're going to learn how culture and society create some of that and why that's a barrier to our ability to parent effectively, our ability to deal with an alienated child, and the role it plays in creating the alienation. And just for a frame of reference, we now know through MRI studies that if a mother feels stress, which tell me if there's ever been any mother who hasn't felt stress during pregnancy. I mean, just the act of being pregnant is, I don't know, I'm not a woman, but I have been, I watched my ex-wife go through pregnancy and the stress is immense. That stress alone creates actual DNA and genetic changes in the child. We can now see that through MRI studies. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not blaming moms here because stress can come from an inattentive husband, a husband who works too much, or being a single mother. This is not about mom is to blame for that stress. What this speaks to is our culture's lack of emotional development and the lack of skills and tools we all have because our society refuses to recognize emotions. Think of the messaging we've all received about emotions, that it makes you weak, bad, incapable. You obviously can't control yourself. We send the message to men to be stoic and if you're in the boardroom, I never let my feelings get in the way. Well, all of those messages and definitions and pressures we put on both men and women are from a lack of information and knowledge that you can never divorce any thought or action from emotion. It's just a lack of understanding and knowing that everything we do is emotion-based. And that's why it's critical that for every parent, regardless if there's alienation or not, but every parent and every individual to gain emotional mastery, because your life is literally a reflection of your emotional condition. So the more chaotic or stressful or tragic or whatever may be in it, all of those tragedies are a window into pain that hasn't been dealt with and hasn't been, it doesn't have the emotional mastery process to work through so that you can respond differently. And that's, some of the stuff we're going to cover. I'm going to give you some of the basics to, one, get into the reality of that, of a whole new understanding of, wow, no one's ever talked about this. I mean, maybe you've heard, if you're a junkie like me and like to research it, maybe that's familiar to you. But for the vast majority of the population, they're completely unaware of how incredibly important your emotional condition is to every aspect of your life. And so this will all be new information. Now, one thing to do as you're listening to all of this is pay attention to your emotional reaction. For many people, you might already be feeling anger, a sense of withdrawal, or maybe numb or blank or confusion or denial or dismissive, like, oh, this isn't true. All of those, pay attention to what your thoughts are. If it were me, my suggestion would be write it all down, especially if there are judgmental words. This is silly. That's not true. I didn't hurt my kid. All of those things. And whatever those sentences are, put next to it what the emotion is you're feeling. Is it anger, disgust? Is it sadness? Is it worthlessness? What are you feeling as you hear all of this new information? The reason I tell you to do that is because that's your window into your own emotional condition that hasn't been addressed yet. None of this is judgmental. None of this is convicting or hurtful or saying you're a bad person or that there's anything wrong with you as a parent. We all are perfectly imperfect. We all make mistakes. And even in our darkest, most incomplete and imperfect moments, we all have inherent worth and value. But because of some of the things I'm going to talk about next, we get detached from that. And that's why those negative feelings are coming up. They're actually the emotional definitions and responses, the shame that was placed into you as a child. It's not even your current expression of yourself as an adult. It's childhood trauma showing itself to you. It's a gift. It's your way to start reconciling the alienation within yourself, how hurtful that's been, and the dynamic between you and your child. So my suggestion to you is to keep track of what are you feeling, then ask yourself, where in my body do I feel it? All right. Now, you can, for most people, they don't know what they're feeling. In fact, 70% of the whole population on this planet doesn't even feel. They're that detached because of the next thing I'm going to talk about, the attachment authenticity bind that we all experience in childhood. And so what you can do is on my website, if you go to the resources tab, and scroll down about halfway, I have a free feelings wheel. If you don't want to go to my website, that's fine. Just type into Google feelings wheel, print one off and keep it with you. And ask yourself, as you experience all of this information, what am I feeling? Look at that feelings wheel, write it down. Ask yourself, where in my body do I feel it? There will usually be to certain specific feelings. It'll correlate to certain parts of your body because we store all of our emotional trauma, not in memories in our head, but as physical reactions, as feelings in our body. And so it's a great way to start reconnecting to our body and understanding how these emotions have played out. And the way to figure that out is ask yourself, all right, what's my first memory of having this thought, feeling, and reaction in my body? All right. Now, for most people, again, listen to the way I said it. What's your first memory? Well, most people, even though I said first, they'll remember something in the last 1 to 5 years. Okay, write it down. Then ask yourself, okay, what was the next time before that? Write it down. Keep tracing it back. Eventually, you're going to arrive at the first time you felt it was somewhere between usually 3 and about 12 years old. Now, for many people, they won't remember a specific event with their parents or something like that, but they will have a general sense of, God, I was about 4 years old or 8 years old, something like that. Well, now you can see how your feelings from your childhood are still replaying themselves. No matter if you're 40, 60, 80 years old, you're reliving the unhealed pain from the past. And that's why you're having the reaction. I'll get into that more when I talk about how emotions work. So let's move in to the next part of this, where I'm going to give you a couple of stories of how this showed up in my life. The first one was very simply, most people wouldn't consider this as trauma, but my dad was an engineer. And I can remember, I still have this memory of hiding behind the wall, looking at my dad sitting in his big leather chair, watching TV after a day of work. And I knew what was coming. I needed help with math homework, and my dad's an engineer. But I was so afraid because I knew what would happen every time I asked him. But I needed the answers. I didn't want to fail in school. So sheepishly, I would come out. And I'd finally just go, Dad, I need your help with this. And almost invariably, okay, what now? And then he'd look at it and he'd say, well, Kenny, don't you see? All you have to do is this. The answer is right there. Now, my dad's exasperation, while very condescending and demeaning, was that his intent? No. My parents were 16 and 18 when they were married, 21 and 23 with 4 kids. So my dad would have been in his late 20s, early 30s. He came from a childhood where he was beat to death, even if he just didn't finish what was on his plate. Now, he never hit us, but society never taught him, look, we all need to go heal this stuff. Society never taught him how to regulate his emotions and gain emotional mastery. My dad was just doing the best he could. He was human. He was limited. But because we don't teach this, because we're not in truth about how this works, I have spent my life feeling stupid. It is a message that I have always struggled with, because that was the indirect, my dad never said that. He never called me that. But through his body language and his tone, I heard the message, gosh, I must be really stupid if I don't know this answer. That's how simple and easy. Just, my dad just came home from work. He's got 4 kids within 5 years of each other. We're all athletes. It takes a tremendous amount of money to feed us, pay for all of it. He's, starting his career and the stresses of it. Now, I'm not condoning his actions, because that wouldn't be loving either. But I am pointing to the fact of how easy childhood trauma gets created, and how that feeling, that's why I gave you that exercise, how that feeling has replayed throughout my life. A second simple story is this. I was about 12 years old, and I just reached into the refrigerator to grab cottage cheese. I was hungry. And my mom screamed out, no, 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 that's for the dogs. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but my mom was on a strict budget because, money was tight. Again, 4 kids that are all athletes. My mom had several fears. One was, if all the food's gone, I can't feed you kids. I only have X amount of dollars to get through the month. And if the food's gone, what am I going to do then? The other thing was, my mom would use the cottage cheese to hide the dog's pills when they got sick. Now, did I hear any of that? Did my mom explain any of that to me? No, because of the lack of emotional mastery and her own childhood where she was adopted and abused and went through things. My mom just reacted from her childlike state of unresolved pain and fear and stress. And so what I was left with was a couple of decisions that I made. One, if I eat, I'm in trouble. If I eat, I'm a bad kid. My mom doesn't love me. And number 3, we feed the dogs in this house before we feed the children. Did my mom say any of that? No, but you're going to see when I get to how emotions are made, this is what we do. And so I spent most of my life starving myself. I used to play pro hockey, and I basically lived off of a super big gulp and ding dongs. If people had asked me to eat, I'm like, no, I can't stand eating. It bores me. It would literally make me angry to eat. I had no idea that my lack of desire to eat had anything to do with that moment in childhood. Again, that's why I suggested, what are you feeling? Where in your body do you feel it? What's your first memory? You're going to see how all of us, this is what I call the worst day cycle. I wrote about it in my book, Your Journey to Success. I don't have the time in this presentation to go through it, but this is how we all repeat the trauma against ourselves as adults, because as a society, we don't teach about emotional mastery. We don't teach these basic skills and tools that we need. And so we all just relive that pain against ourselves and transfer it back down into our children in different ways. So let me now move into the next piece of this, what I call the attachment and authenticity bind that we're all placed in. First of all, every single one of us needs attachment. As a species, if we don't physically and emotionally attach to another human being, we'll die. They found that out. I always get it mixed up, Poland or Yugoslavia, I can't remember, an Eastern country where they took newborns and just stuffed them in orphanages and never touched them or held them. And they just fed them, but they never held them. And all of them, almost all of them died. We need that attachment to survive. And the second thing we need is the pursuit of our authenticity. And let me finish with attunement before I get into authenticity. But so what happens is, as a child, we make a determination, especially once cognition kicks in, that whatever the family dynamic is, we will become whatever we need to become to fit in, to get attachment. Like for me, my mom was an alcoholic, my dad a rageaholic. I became the emotional support for both my mother and my father, as basically a surrogate spouse for both of them. That became my role. Especially for my mother. For instance, my mom used to come to me and say, you know, the next time I want to drink, will you give me a hug instead? And so my whole life was about trying to keep my mother sober. That's it. What I learned, the way I learned to, because what's happening in that is an attachment connection. Think of it like this: the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord is meant to feed the child, right? While the child's in the womb. Well, in this dynamic, that gets flipped, and now the child is feeding the parent. Well, that's what I had to do. Well, these are, you know, some of the subconscious things that children end up creating to survive that. They create mechanisms. So I want you to think through your own, you know, what happened to your child? What direction did they start going? I know for me, I became sick and hurt all of the time. I was always, actually, all the kids in the house were sick and hurt nonstop, because there was so much detachment from authentic connection in our house. The greatest way to get attachment from anyone, regardless of what age, is to get sick or hurt, because all of a sudden we're incapacitated. So now the focus has to be on us. They have to take care of us, right? So it's a forced attachment mechanism. Now, before I became an expert in all of this and started working on healing all of this, I had an intuitive, a really intuitive breakthrough and understanding of how this all worked. I was, you know, all throughout high school, I had back problems. I was in and out of the hospital. And when it would flare up, I couldn't walk. Well, it flared up again, and I was in the garage. I just collapsed in our garage. And I was screaming out to my mother because my crutches, which I needed to be able to move, were up in the rafters. And I was screaming for her help, and she wouldn't come. And there was a reason why. I finally screamed out. Sorry, I just went blank. I kind of relived the moment. I'm like, what? It just, like, this is how trauma happens. Sometimes you can be talking about it, and still, even as an adult, it can resurface. And I think part of why I blanked is I swore as a kid. I'll try and say this without swearing, but what I screamed out to my mom was, "You selfish son of a, when will you stay sober long enough to take care of me?" In that moment, I got chills. I still get chills, because I realized, oh my God, I have been making myself sick and hurt all these years to try and get my mom to stop drinking. This day was the one and only time she was drunk and couldn't take care of me. That was my first insight, before I knew any of this, of the power of emotions and how we create these tragedies to try and get the attachment that we didn't get. Because attachment requires what's called attunement. That's the ability for the parent to take all the stresses of their life, put them on the side, walk in from work or whatever it may be, and go, "Hey, how you doing? What's up, little guy or little girl?" Like, to be fully emotionally present. Well, let's face it, that's almost impossible as a human being. I mean, look at how life runs. Your phone is going off nonstop, and there's news flashes. Like, we are like overwhelmed just by technology itself. Like, throw everything else, just technology itself, emails dinging, text messages dinging, the TV's on. Like, it's just too much. Then you throw in, oh my God, I've got to keep a marriage together. And oh my God, I got to raise these kids. And oh, I have these hobbies. Like, there is so much to navigate emotionally in life. No parent, because we're human and we're limited, we are not bad. We can't be present emotionally at all times and attuned to our children. When there's a lack of attunement, boom, that's childhood trauma. That creates a wound that has lasting effects the rest of our life. All right. Now, because of that lack of attachment and attunement, that creates the second piece of the attachment authenticity bind. Authenticity is the ability for each individual, each child, to pursue their own inherent power, what I call their morals and values, needs and wants, negotiables and non-negotiables, to become what they desire from life. Because it's our job as a parent of, yes, there are things we instruct our kids on, we keep them safe and all of that. But our primary role as a parent is to create an emotionally attuned environment for our child to express their authenticity, to become what they want. And so you may, for yourself, maybe you were artistic, but mom and dad said, no, you're going to play sports. Or maybe it was the opposite. And it's this squashing of the authenticity of the child to be what we need them to be, so that we don't feel stress and so that we feel accomplished as a parent. Well, that's at the destruction of our child. And so think it again, I urge you, I'm sure as all of this is being said to you, really track your feelings in your body and your first memories of this, of how this is coming up, of maybe how you were a wonderful parent, but perfectly imperfect, and may have done some of these things to your own child, not because you're a bad parent, not because you didn't love and adore everything about them, but because you just didn't know. Society didn't teach you how these things impact us and the gravity of them. And so please, if any shame or any hurt or sadness is coming up, recognize those. I'm going to get to the next piece where to help you recognize this, that those feelings are not yours. You are not a bad person. You are not a bad parent. You are not without worth. Those are the hurtful messages from your own perfectly imperfect parents and the societal messages that you experienced when you were a child. None of that is true. And I'm going to now walk you through why that is. All right. And all of this comes from a lady named Lisa Feldman Barrett. She is in the top 1% of all scientists, regardless of what their discipline, that is quoted in the world today for her work and her discoveries on how emotions work. For centuries, or not centuries, but for a very long time, we have lived under the idea that emotions are, we're born with them, and that there are, kind of, depending on who you talk to, 8 to 10 basic emotions. Well, she has proven that whole theory is completely false and none of it's correct. And what she shows is that all of us learn emotions from the parents, our caregivers as a child, and the societal messages that are present during our upbringing, and the state of our body. Now, I'm going to leave the state of our body out of it just because this presentation is focused on, parenting, and, it's more cogent and relevant to parental alienation. So remember I said earlier, our kids become the emotional condition of our parents. And so emotions, every single emotion has some basic tenets to it. There is the first thing that happens when we're a child, we create a summary, a category, and a definition. So remember how I talked about my mom with cottage cheese? The summary that I created and was, okay, if I eat, I'm bad. If I eat, mom doesn't love me and I get in trouble. And if I eat, or dogs, are more important, get fed before the kids do. All right, so that's the summary I created. Now, the categories I put that in were I'm worthless, I'm less than. And so the definition became, okay, if that's what the messages are here, then my definition for food is it's bad. I won't eat. All right. And so this is now, so when you're experiencing an emotion as a child or as an infant or those first 7 years, you're observing your parents. And they've shown us that even infants, a year old, can start to pick up on how the parents express emotions. Think of different cultures. Like, here's a great example. If you live in the Far East and you don't sit like this when you eat and slurp your food, you're being incredibly disgraceful and rude to the people who've had you over. I know in my house, that was completely the opposite. I was raised with very old world traditional manners, only one utensil in your hand at all times, unless you're cutting something. Once you're finished with it, the other hand goes in your lap. You always chew with your mouth closed. You never speak with your mouth full. Very strict rules around all of that. My dad would slam the table and have a huge reaction to any misalignment from that summary category and definition of what, proper eating is, right? So when we as parents, we learn these same things, and then, a lot of times we might decide to be the black sheep. A lot of times people will go, well, I didn't do anything my parents did. And what that means is they're still being affected and traumatized by their parent because they still went in the opposite direction. Remember what authenticity is: the pursuit of their own morals, values, needs, wants, negotiables, and non-negotiables. Just doing the opposite is a revolt. It's not authentic. It's still in response to what they experienced. All right. And so the black sheep is the polar opposite of what, like I was, the pleaser. But there's no difference between the two. They're still in that adapted, wounded child place because of the attachment authenticity bind that they experienced in childhood. So how does culture affect us? Well, if you're in my age group, I was having a discussion with someone about this yesterday. Tattoos and the way kids wear their hats and the way they dress. Well, in my age group, if you got a tattoo as a kid, oh my God, you were banished from society. Like, that was pure sin. If you did the flat, there was that old TV show with Will Smith and the kid named Urkel. I can't remember the name of the show, but he was the so-called nerd. And so the way the kids dress now, that's how I hate to put judgments, but this is how we create emotions. We put these definitions on things. The definition is of the way kids dress now was you're a nerd, you're an outcast of society. Well, now those definitions are completely different. Okay. Now I'm going to bring up another way of how, because most people are like, well, no, you made me feel, you made me think this. And this next example blows that up. Now, before I say it, because of the current climate and culture, you might have a very big emotional reaction. I am not passing judgment. I'm not saying this is okay or not okay. That has nothing to do with the topic. What I'm giving you is a very powerful example of how emotions are made, and that even as an adult at 80 years old, nobody makes us feel, think, or do anything. Every emotion we feel as an adult is an expression of what we learned from our parents and society as a child. It is a window into the pain. We get to decide, wait a minute, this feels like pain. I need to create a new category, summary, and definition because this is destroying me. And the best example of that is the N-word. Hold on to your hats. um, and recognize the feeling that comes up, even as I say that. But let me explain myself. If you are a person of color and you call another person that word, it is loving, it is kind, it is inclusive, it's a recognition of being a selected private member of an exclusive club. It is a word of total love and adoration, right? That's what it expresses. Now, if you are a person outside of that color or that ethnicity, it is derogatory, it is defaming, it is demeaning, it is despicable. I'm not saying it should be this, that their decision to have two different meanings for it is wrong. It's fine. I'm okay with any of that. The reason for the example is to show, to prove, oh my God, he's right. We decide how we summarize, categorize, and define every single thing we see and feel in our society, our culture, and our life. Nobody makes me feel that. I learned that this is how you summarize it based on if this person says it or that person says it. That's what creates all of this turmoil. And this is the overwhelming need for emotional mastery, for people to understand, wait a minute, my child's reaction to me and their desire to no longer be with me, in part, is from summaries, categories, and definitions I imparted to them, but some I had absolutely no influence over. It was this cultural messaging at the time. But oh my God, now it starts to make sense. Now I can actually take ownership over something I can control. I can't control how culture and society changes. That's everyone, collectively choosing how to summarize, categorize, and define emotions and make this into the new right thing to do. I can't control that, but I can control me. Oh my gosh, this is a window into what do I feel? Where in my body do I feel it? And where's my first memory? And how did I then express that to my child and give them these definitions that now they think that the most correct definition, the most proper summary, category, and definition that they can use is to leave me. How did that happen? What's the part I played? What's the part society played? How are they doing that to themselves? Because aspects of it have nothing to do with me, but I am a part of that process. And so that leads us into emotional mastery, the 4 pillars of emotional mastery, and why it's so important. Those 4 pillars are truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. We have to get into truth. We are all perfectly imperfect. As parents and as human beings, we are limited. We will, just by the fact that we are human, make mistakes that leave wounds in our children, that even if every single one of us went to school all day, every day, and learned how emotional mastery and learned how to be the perfect attuned parent to create healthy attachment and foster an environment for them to pursue their authenticity, that we just won't be able to do it. And that doesn't make us bad. But it is truth that we've played a part in this. And that's why we move into responsibility. And responsibility is all about, what can I control? What is it? What part have, pardon me, what part have I played in this tragic dynamic that's going on between myself and my children? I'm responsible for the way I'm currently feeling about it. I'm responsible for the way I feel and react to their slanderous comments to me or anyone else's, whether it's my husband or wife or cultural messages or anything. I'm responsible. I'm creating my own summaries, categories, and definitions of every emotional reaction I have. I'm responsible to learn how to shift those so that they work for me and against me. I'm responsible for a lifelong commitment to a healing journey. And healing means we go back and we ask ourselves, the first step at least. What am I feeling? Where in my body do I feel it? And what's my first memory? Because everything that's going on inside of me as I listen to this presentation or any aspect of my adult life was all learned in childhood. And so if I want to succeed at fostering a new, loving, healthy connection and reconnecting to my alienated child and to myself, I must embark on a healing journey. I must become an expert in how my parents' beautiful, perfect imperfections and the societal message that I grew up with created who I am. That's the first step. Truth and awareness and taking responsibility to take that healing journey and go figure that out. And then recognize, okay, now that I have the basis of why I think, feel, believe, and act the way I do, and imparted certain morals and values and all of this, oh my gosh, I realized, wait a minute, this wasn't really my moral and value. I was just doing what mom and dad said. I'll give you, like, remember I used that manners example. I've done this journey and it never ends. I'm still on it. But I had to look at the manners one because my dad was violent. He'd slam the table. Like, I mean, any misstep with manners would create a huge reaction. So I've always been hyper picky about manners. This is kind of a funny story. This was in my early 20s, and I still lament this. I went on a date with, to this day, a woman who might be the most beautiful woman I've ever laid eyes on. I almost couldn't speak. She was so captivating. And on her first date, I took her to dinner. She ordered soup. I will never forget. She grabbed the spoon, the soup spoon, like this, like a shovel. And then she put her arms on the table and her mouth, I'm talking this far from her soup, and started to shovel it. And this is not an exaggeration, but started to go. People tables away were looking over, and I literally sat there going, no, like inside I'm screaming, going, no, you can't do this. I can't date you now. Like, please stop. And there's an example of me learning a summary, category, and definition. That after looking at it, while I'm not that rigid, I don't slam the table like my father, I have decided this fits my morals and values, that table manners are very important to me. Now, that doesn't make it right. It's learned, but I've made the choice to do that. And that's part of the healing journey, is to recognize, wait a minute, how did we impart lessons to our children? Were they truly ours, or were they adaptations because of the attachment authenticity bind? Do we need to maybe rethink those and eventually do some amends around those aspects of our parenting? And again, this moves us into the next step, forgiveness. When we do this work, we recognize we made a lot of mistakes. Again, not because we're bad people, not because we're deficient in some way. We're human. We're limited. It is an inherent aspect of humanity and life that we will screw up nonstop, and it's okay. And whether we are perfect or we mess up, regardless of which, we always have inherent worth. We are always of value. And what this process is learning how to bring value to this. And that's why forgiveness is so important. These are very tough truths to learn about, hear about, and admit in ourselves. And so if we don't live in truth and admit these things about ourselves, if we don't take responsibility, and if we don't heal, we can't forgive ourselves. Because do you see that those imperfect parts of ourselves that we hate and we don't want anyone to know about, not even ourselves, what they are, the broken, discarded child who was sent the message, like, for me, I can't eat food. I'm stupid. And so if I'm not willing to face that, I am now the author of my own attachment authenticity bind. And so the ability to live in truth of my imperfections, to take responsibility for them by doing the healing work, allows me to gather up that child who created summaries, categories, and definitions that said he was rejected and of no worth and of no value. It allows me to become the parent for myself that no parent can do perfectly, to regather that part of myself in and adore it and love it. And that allows me then to forgive my parents' perfect imperfections. Now, do you see the value in living a life that's dedicated to emotional mastery? Remember, children become the emotional condition of their parents. So when we live to learn it, when we learn to live in truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness, our children can learn it too. I have had clients with instances where they have been detached from their children 1,000 miles away. They start working on this and their child reaches out. The power of changing your emotional condition, because remember, everything we do starts with an emotion. Our child becomes our emotional condition. The greatest thing we can ever do for our child at any time, regardless of age, is to develop emotional mastery, since everything starts from that and ends with emotions. Now, I'm not guaranteeing you that your child's going to come back, but I will guarantee you this. When they do come back, you'll be in a position where you can love all of them and they'll feel that. And that will give them permission to start loving all of them. And they might go on the truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness journey, and then come to you and take ownership for the part they've played in the alienation. This is a two-person dynamic. This child was taught in part by you, but most often from the other really aggressive, alienating parent. But remember, we pick that person. That's a reflection on us. We need to look at that and why we pick that. And I'll just take complete on. I have to tell this story. And this is, you want to talk about living in truth. Because of what I went through as a child, I remember saying for years, I won't have children. Well, as I embarked on this journey and started to realize how all of this worked, I remember being out for a walk and I was just punched in the stomach when I realized, oh my God, I chose a woman who was physically and verbally abusive, who would make certain that I wasn't a parent to my children. That's how powerful emotions are. That even as a child, a young adult, when I declared, I don't want children, that's a feeling that creates that thought that comes from a child who was so neglected and abandoned, that feels so unworthy of guiding and leading another human being in this life that they don't want the responsibility. And so, unbeknownst to me, and all of this happens subconsciously, as Julian James points out, 95 to 99% of our adult life is run by our subconscious. We are just reliving the patterns of our childhood, and we don't know that. We think we're making adult decisions, but we're not. We are reliving the subconscious messages that were delivered to us in the first 7 years of life. And as Bruce Lipton points out, 70% of all messaging children hear in the first 7 years of life is negative, disempowering, and destructive. That was certainly my messaging. And so, because nobody, society and culture refuses to teach emotional mastery, to get into truth and take responsibility and do the healing work and be forgiving towards ourselves and others. No one taught me that everything I went through created a feeling that says I'm not worthy of a child, which then created an attraction, because attraction is just a feeling to relive, and our attraction to other people. The reason we're attracted to these abusive people is they mirror the abuse in our childhood. And so I picked somebody who would guarantee that I wouldn't be a father to my children. That's on me. I have to live in truth, take responsibility, do the healing work, become the emotionally aware, attuned parent who takes ownership and responsibility of his perfect imperfections, and forgive myself. I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. If I knew better, if I knew more, I would have done better. I would have done more. I didn't know how. I'm not bad. I'm not unworthy. I'm not useless. I do not need to be discarded. I am human. I am limited. That is the single greatest way we can help our children and help ourselves through this incredibly overwhelming, destructive dynamic. I said to you, I'd give you some resources. I have a client who's in my private group who's experienced this parental alienation. And as I teach all my clients, go become an expert. I don't know everything. I know what I know, but there are so many brilliant teachers out there that can help you through this. And she's participating in a group called, it's called the Family Separation Clinic that is out of the UK. And everything I've heard, all the suggestions and advice and the way she talks about parental alienation, it's been fantastic. If you need a support group, if you need answers, I recommend them. I've been very impressed with her progress and everything she's learned from that. When it comes to developing emotional mastery, healing the pain from your past, moving to the next step, now that you know what you're feeling, where in your body you're feeling it, and your first memory of it. That's the beginning for you to be aware of the worst day cycle, how you've been repeating the pain from the past over and over against yourself. If you'd like to go on the journey to start healing that and start living in truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness, I would suggest my book, Your Journey to Success, which can be found on my website or Amazon. I also have, I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch. I have lots of different things. Like, it's not where I want to go with this. I'm just letting you know, if you want it, just Google my name and go to my website. It's all there, all the things I offer. My goal in being transparent about my own perfect imperfections is to give you permission to do the same, to forgive yourself, forgive your parents, forgive your child, to fight the societal epidemic of denial and self-deception that robs us from living in truth, taking responsibility, and doing the healing work, so we can forgive ourselves and we can love ourselves and we can live in a place that, regardless of what our child chooses, I still am not in contact with my kids, but I know this: I'm a damn good dad. I've done the work and I continue to do the work, and that's my commitment. Whether I never see my kids ever again, I will not stop doing the work. I will not stop pursuing truth of where I've been imperfect. Take responsibility for it by putting a plan in place to do the healing work. Forgive myself because I'm human and limited, and have nothing but grace and forgiveness that they're just doing the best they can from the summaries, categories, and definitions that both their mother and myself placed in them. And so I support them. They are living to their best ability right now. And that's me allowing them, creating the attuned parent who allows my child to pursue their own authenticity. And at this point, their authentic self, based on what they know about themselves, is to not have a relationship with me. Well, good for you. I support you. It is your journey. And my job is to be your support system, not your dictator. This is not about me. This is about you and you living in what works best for you. I felt like for a second there, I was just talking to my kids as though they were here. Sorry, I just kind of got into that. So at any rate, I hope this helps you. And I hope if anything hurtful came up or if you felt judged in any way, it's because I'm human. I may have said things in a way that was hurtful. It's not my intent. And if it felt hurtful, again, remember, that's not because I hurt you. That's a window into how you were hurt as a child. Use that to learn about it, to live in truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. And at least in my life experience, that's the best way to conquer parental alienation, is by developing emotional mastery. I hope that helps you.